Okay, we have 5. Okay, great. So I'm going to start with a roll call, and then I'll read that script. So, Rhea.
Rhea's here.
Ted.
Ted is present.
Ron.
Ron Foisey, present.
Sundar.
Sundar Subramanian, present.
Rachel.
Present.
And let's see. That's it for now. Okay, so still expecting John. I haven't heard anybody bowing out for tonight. I'm still expecting Curtis. And I will go through the meeting script in just a moment.
Quick question, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Rachel, have you been sworn in?
No,
She is
I have not been sworn in yet.
Okay.
There we go, my wonderful script. Good evening. This open meeting of the Hopkinton Zoning Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we are complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. For this meeting, the Zoning Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the board's agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting will also be broadcast by HCAM TV through one or many of its channels or platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. And I think that covers it. So, hello everyone. I've been doing a little bit of research on the legal aspects and trying to find places that tell me more about the definition of public welfare and or health, safety, and welfare. There's actually quite a few things related to the field of architecture, because architects are licensed and part of their licensing in most states has that wording. So that's interesting. And, it has some, at least some, a little bit relevance to what we're doing. But I have, I'm going to be continuing to research that aspect of things. It's very vague, and I think that it's not going to get less vague in terms of its definition. And I don't feel like we're going to get a lot more specifics from town council based on the last information that they gave us. So, one of the definitions that I found, they talked about the difference between safety and welfare. Safety being those aspects that protect occupants, users, and any others affected by buildings or sites from harm. And welfare, those aspects of professional practice that enable equitable access, elevate the human experience, encourage social interaction, and benefit the environment. And then another definition I found really just broke it down to being the well-being of the user or the person, resulting from their interaction with the environment. So it's very vague. Yes.
Could you just go through that definition for welfare that had 4 parts? I'm interested in part 2.
Sure.
Part 2 and part 4 might be the most helpful to us.
Okay. Equitable access, enable equitable access, elevate the human experience, encourage social interaction, and benefit the environment.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I also know that I believe you all received a spreadsheet table from Curtis within the last 15 minutes or so. That was just a quick overview of what our setbacks are right now in our zoning. And also Ted has some information from Athol, and I don't know if you'd like to just give us a brief overview of what you talked about with the town planner or director of land use in
Sure.
Athol.
Sure, I'll do the best I can. So I spoke with, his name is Eric Smith, and I think he's Athol's John Gelsich, as near as I can tell. And he's been on the job, I think, since 2016. So he's been there for a while. What he said was in 2016, there were 2 solar developments that came to town, and one of them was in a gravel quarry or something, and nobody thought anything of it negatively because nobody could see what was going on. But then in the next year, 6 more were proposed in the town. And so Athol started raising their head and thinking about what's going on with solar development. In October, they have their town meeting in October, apparently in Athol. They put on the town meeting agenda several bylaw changes having to do with solar. They were to force special permitting for ground-mounted solar in all but one area, the rural single-family residential, to have 75-foot setbacks for solar, which is more than what Curtis tells us we have anywhere in town. Lots must exceed 5 acres, various design rules, some screening rules, no use of herbicides to control vegetation, I thought was an interesting addition. And then some articles that were just about running things. That doesn't make much sense. Waivers, fees, severability. That is, if somebody decides that one of those articles is unlawful, it doesn't mean the whole thing goes out the window. So they thought, and those passed by huge majorities, easily passed town meeting. And then what they found very quickly is it accomplished almost nothing as a new solar development came to town, followed all of those rules, was right next to conservation land, was right next to, I think, a neighborhood. And they felt the need to go right back to the drawing board. That's when they contacted Tufts, and those Tufts graduate students did the work they did. As near as I can tell, that study didn't lead to any changes. What led to changes was continuing to push to build more solar even after those October 27 changes. And in July of 2019, they voted in 180-2 an 18-month moratorium on all commercial solar development. And the Attorney General signed off on that. Knowing that they had 18 months to figure out what to do next, their next move was, and I'm afraid my notes don't have a date, but I should be getting an email from Mr. Smith tomorrow giving me all sorts of more detail. And I will, of course, share whatever seems helpful to share. But after the moratorium, they had an article for October 2019, I presume, that said that solar development must be on previously disturbed land only. There were some machinations in town, there were some compromises in town, but essentially what they have now is a law that says you can only put commercial solar on land that has been previously disturbed. You cannot clear cut trees or go into any undisturbed areas for solar. So while the Tufts survey is very interesting, and it was a really interesting and enlightening process for them, it doesn't have much to say about where they landed now to try to deal with their difficulties with commercial solar development flourishing all over Athol. So that's my update from Athol.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, through the chair, question for Ted.
Go ahead.
So when Athol decided the whole previously disturbed land provision, was that upheld? What I'm trying to ask is, I think there is some clause which says it cannot be overly restrictive to potential developers. Did that meet that criteria, and has that somehow sustained itself on the books with still meeting that criteria?
So it was, first of all, a somewhat rushed discussion. He called me 20 minutes before the end of the day, and he said, I wanted to get back to you. I figured you had a meeting tonight. So I don't know that I have that answer for sure, but he certainly didn't indicate that anything had been challenged. And I asked him on a couple of their other things they did you get any legal challenges? And he said no to all of them, but he knows that I would assume that he'd know that that was on my mind and would have brought up if there was any legal challenge to that rule. Mm-hmm. What he did say is, and I mentioned to you that there was a little bit of compromising. He told me in town, 3 parcels, 3 landowners who had plans in the works. They weren't necessarily submitted to the planning board or the conservation commission in town. And one of the compromises Athol made was these 3 parcels of land we will allow to continue to discuss. They will not be included in this new broader rule that it can only be on only on previously disturbed land. So that was one of the compromises they made. And maybe that compromise helped them with those owners not challenging, but I don't know if that's true or not. I do know he said they made that compromise to ease it through town meeting.
That's a great standard for preventing more large solar arrays in Hopkinton, because most of our land has not been previously disturbed. I tried to do some research today. I kind of ran out of time. I'm just juggling a lot of stuff. I researched Wellesley, realized that they said they needed a minimum output of 250 kilowatts DC, but they only had 1 parcel. And I think we've discussed Wellesley and Weston before, but I needed to go back and relook at it. Mm-hmm. Weston is only 3 parcels, and they had a site alteration approval process. So in line with Athol, perhaps, though I didn't get into the detail on whether it's disturbed or not, land that's been disturbed or not. I did come across, and this is very time consuming because you're reading through bylaws that, in different towns, they're a mess. I mean, they're not organized very well. It's like just finding solar bylaws is crazy. So there's a little town called West Hampton, and this was a kind of a critical benchmark that I saw, which was no solar array would exceed 1.5 acres. Now, the reason that's interesting to me is because the large solar guys out there, they need to do a bigger project to make it economically feasible. So you're almost letting the marketplace dictate whether or not this is going to happen. And they actually go into detail of highlighting, they go into highlighting small, medium, and large arrays in West Hampton. So like 2,100 square feet array was the small one, and the large was 32,000. So I like the previously disturbed land only. I also like this 1.5 acres as a the maximum that could be built on. I mean, do I really think that people are going to start putting solar arrays in their backyards of 1.5 acres? No, I really don't. Because it's not going to be that cost effective for them to transmit the electricity to a system that would make it financially feasible. That's what I was able to get today. I'm sorry I couldn't get more.
No, thank you. Thank you for doing research. Anyone else find anything or think of anything?
Mary?
Yes.
So the only other thing that I did, and I sent you an email maybe 10 minutes before this meeting started, so I don't know if you saw it, but mostly I wanted to tell you in case I forgot. Instead, I'm going to throw it out there now so I don't forget. I did a little thinking about what 60 feet is. Again, Curtis's spreadsheet says right now in town, our maximum setback anywhere is 60 feet. Athol had a rule, their 2017 bylaw, that set it at 75 feet. So I wanted to do a little thinking about what that meant. And I think that last week, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like for discussion purposes, we were throwing out the idea of 100-foot setback, maybe to increase setbacks. Anyway, I did a little measuring. 60 feet, which is our biggest setback right now, is 6.5 parking spaces. The width of 6.5 parking spaces. That's it. That's 60 feet. 100 feet, which was, again, I think are a little bit like, well, what if we made a setback 100 feet? That's not quite 11 parking spaces. Another way to think about it is 60 feet is almost the pitching rubber to home plate on a baseball field. That's it. That's 60 feet. 100 feet is a little bit more than first base to second base on a baseball field. 100 feet might at first glance, first hear, sound like a significant setback. It's first base to second base. I'm an old man, gaining weight, falling apart. I can throw a baseball 150 feet. That's what I can throw. Finally, thinking about setbacks, I used Google Maps and I measured the distance from 24 Alexander Road's back door to the closest solar panel in the array behind Alexander Road. And again, if you have not driven by Alexander Road, to take a look at what a solar project close to, and they, by the way, have, I think, bigger than 60-foot setbacks. From the back door of 24 Alexander Road to the nearest solar panel is 321 feet. So I bring all this up to say, if we talk about maybe we are allowed to expand setbacks beyond what we have specifically for solar, although Elaine Lazarus advised us a few years ago that would be hard to do. Even a 300-foot setback gets you close to what gets you in the neighborhood of what it looks like in Alexander Road. So if we're talking about setbacks as a way to try to deal with some of the issues that we're thinking of, I would say keep in mind those numbers and those distances.
I just wanted to acknowledge that John, Madhu, and Curtis are here now. They have been for a while, but could I share my screen, John? Okay, thanks. I'm sorry, technical difficulties, meaning I'm still trying to figure it out. Okay. I think this is happening. Okay. So this, these are some pictures. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. These are some pictures from Alexander Road area, and this when the I'm trying to do the slideshow, that might be larger. Yeah. So this is just pictures from the backyard. That says actually pictures from the street, so it's not even from the backyard. The backyards are, the closer view, and this is from Mr. Paris, who lives in that neighborhood. And just as an example, because they do have a fairly large buffer, but because of the angle and the grade and the fact that it's, there's not a lot of low screening and year-round screening, that affects the visibility of these screens. And this example is a satellite view of it's actually the Lumber Street development, but it borders on Alexander Road here. But I just wanted to bring this up as part of our discussion of grade and slopes.
Mary,
Yes?
would you please show the picture from the street again? One more back. Oh, two more back. Is that the one? Yeah.
Yeah, this
So,
one?
Yeah, so I just did a measurement again on Google Maps. And I know you want to talk about slope and I'd like to too.
No, go ahead. That's fine.
But the measurement from the street in front of 24 Alexander Road, and I don't know if it's that house or not, that's 413 feet to the closest solar panel.
Thank you.
So I just find those numbers helpful to me to be able to picture what 60 feet, 100 feet, 400 feet is.
Oh, it's true, because I have no concept, you know, so I'm glad you have examples, and it helps visualize it very much. So this view shows there's a slope downward from the neighborhood to the fence line, essentially. So where there's a fence and there's some shrubbery, some low shrubbery for screening. And then there's a slope upward where all the solar panels are currently located. And because of that situation, all the abutters, and the abutters over here as well, can very clearly see this. The fence has no effect whatsoever. The shrubs that are planted in that area have no effect whatsoever. There would only be some effect if shrubs were planted right up here along their backyard. And you know, that would affect some of the sight line. But it really has. And then I went to the map that we saw last week in terms of the slopes in town. And this area, this whole area, does not even show up on the slopes of 10% or more. So this is a slight slope. I don't know what percent it is, but it doesn't show up. So this is, to me, an example of, if we write things into the bylaw, it doesn't take into account necessarily special circumstances in a particular lot or a particular situation where it's a slope downward, then a slope upward. And sometimes the screening has to be very, very much tailored to the particular site. So that's just an example. I just wanted people to be aware of this and think about it. And we can come back to these if we find it useful. So I'm going to share the outline at this point. So I think this is right.
I think the model bylaws that got passed around had a good bit of detail on screening requirements that we might want to think about more than you have to have an 8-foot fence 100 feet off of the property line.
Right.
And I think I'd sent you some cross sections I'd done for a sand and gravel project back in Illinois, where we looked at sight lines and actually prepared them for sound studies. But you know, you can look at the topography and figure out how, you know, what berm will block off, you know, what vision. So I think we may want to go a little further than, I think, in looking at the present bylaw, it just says mitigate site disturbances or whatever, you know.
Right. And even though we strengthened the language 2 years ago, it just put in a little bit more wording in terms of year round, et cetera. So I know that the planning board has been successful in negotiating better screening and more appropriate buffers in more recently approved developments than Alexander Road. And, you know, I would say learn from the mistakes made at Alexander Road, but nonetheless, it's only as good as the institutional memory. And so, you know, putting more specifics in for a screening may be a good way to go. Okay, I wanted to really quickly review. We were talking last time about lot criteria, maximum size, minimum size, percentage of lot setbacks, and so on. Right at the end of the meeting last time, we talked about the percentage of lot that can be developed, and John was able to give us numbers from the three most recent developments that have been approved, not yet built. One is TGA, that's on Wilson Street, 34 acres total with 7.28 acres of solar, so 21% coverage on that. And this is, none of these have, the wetlands, for instance, have not been subtracted out of the total before we did the percentage, something like that. So I just wanted you to know that. For Franklin Road, it's 69 acres total and 23.5 acres of solar. So that's only 34% coverage. And Mechanic Street, even less. And that was a previously disturbed parcel, but 99 acres total with 14 acres of solar. So 14% coverage. And I'd also be interested to know, in terms of the size of those solar arrays, how they compare to the things that you found, Ria, in megawattage and so on. And I think some of your numbers were in square footage.
Well, I'll tell you, Mary, that after I had mentioned percent coverage and thought about it, I do know that a lot of development includes wetlands as their green space requirement. So I would say that we have to look at entire properties, not so much green space or wetland versus upland.
Yep.
Which I wasn't really clear on when I was thinking about the last time we met, but I'm very clear with it now. We have to come up with another mechanism, and it is coverage. It's the size of the lot. Like I said before, if you make the lot really small, it becomes feasibly undesirable. But which is how some of these other towns are dealing with this. It was either that or only pick 1 or 3 lots in the entire town. I really feel like we can throw a lot of these things at this problem, including the on previously disturbed land only, because that means that, it's a commercial area pretty much, unless we're talking about a logging camp, and, that could be considered previously disturbed. It's just that's probably a long shot at this point, right? I don't think the setbacks going to help us, because I heard about the setbacks, and I because I deal with square footage all day long, I knew 100 feet back was nothing. You just showed the picture of 300 plus, 400 plus feet. I mean, that structure off Alexandra is abominable. I mean, I like who buys a residential house in a residential neighborhood expecting that, to be plunked down behind them? Nobody. Mm-hmm. So it's unfortunate, but we got caught unawares. We just need to fix it.
In general, just can I do a straw poll on setbacks? Because I tend to agree that increasing setbacks aren't going to necessarily help us here. And if I looked at any of the developments that have been done for commercial solar, I'm betting that the setbacks ended up being much more than the minimums. So I don't think changing that.
Through the chair, Mary. When homes are built right next to a busy highway, those walls, the noise barrier walls are erected. Those of course, they are noise barriers, but they also make sure that the people living in the homes may not be able to see the traffic also. So is that something that we should be considering when it comes to screening? I mean, I think most of the screenings that we've probably considered thus far are more like chain link fences through which you can see the solar array. Could we potentially make another requirement, something like a solid wall, and also make it subjective enough that based on the grading of the land and all, um, some kind of height requirement for the solid fence.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, if we didn't say a specific requirement for how the screening was done, the developer could come back with a berm or an evergreen planting that would suffice, or a wall if necessary. There's a lot of precast concrete products out there that you drive a pile in the ground that's got a rock face on it, and then you drop precast panels that look like stacked walls that aren't really, as little more aesthetically pleasing than what you see along the turnpike out here with the, the wood slats. So I think maybe if we had a screening requirement but didn't specify exactly what that was, maybe rule out, something that would not be attractive, but that might get us more what we're looking for here.
Yep, and through the chair, if I may just add one more thing. I was looking at the current solar bylaw language. For our screening language, there is the starting of the sentence is whenever reasonable. That gives them a big loophole to get out of when it's not reasonable, because we say they need to provide year-round screening, but that whenever reasonable gives them an out. I don't know, maybe there was a reason why we had to add that language to that particular screening section. Maybe we make it more stricter that they cannot get out of
Well,
doing
I
proper
agree.
screening.
In fact, we discussed that. I don't remember whether or not it got taken out when we changed the wording 2 years ago or not, but I think it stayed in. And I'm not sure exactly why. I don't know if that's something for the legal side of things. John, do you have any thoughts?
I don't know. I wasn't in town for that conversation.
Mary, I think that might have come from the fact that every site has different, issues, sight lines, noise, whatever, and giving the planning board the ability to guide in a special permit process what that looks like for that specific site was giving the power to the planning board, not so much to the applicant.
Okay. That could well be.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But I guess couldn't we use that to our advantage? So I guess, Ria, your point is there is a level of subjectivity that allows the planning board to, say based on how that land is. I guess my point is exactly that rather than have a fixed guideline of this is the kind of fencing and all, could we use language which says as the town deems appropriate? So if it is indeed close to a residential neighborhood, it probably should be a certain height to be determined. Materials, as Curtis pointed out, something that looks like wooden slats rather than just a hunking piece of concrete, and so on and so forth. So that is really where I was going with this. I don't know if that's permitted, but we are in.
Yeah, so Sundar, that's good point. But what I think that the special permit requires is a discussion on the specific property and the best solution for the specific property. The planning board doesn't have to grant the special permit unless the applicant meets the requirements that the planning board sets out that are reasonable. I mean, it is reasonable to expect that you would have a solid barrier between a residential neighborhood and a solar farm. That's reasonable. So I don't really, that's not the way to cut this cheese, I think. I think the way to cut this cheese is either, create a bylaw that makes it, financially unfeasible for future solar farms, or, going back to lot coverage, but going way lower than 14%. If you're looking at 99 acres total and 14 acres of solar, I mean, that's crazy. That's like a lot of land. I mean, we can use this land for other purposes that are more, friendly, if you will, right?
Well, if I may, through the chair, 2 points.
Yes.
one of the things that you were just saying, Rhea, we can use the land for things that are more appropriate. We don't own it, which is one thing. So we have to be careful about saying what we want people to do with their land. But getting back to the subjectivity, we have to be careful with the subjectivity because, it just leaves too much open, and it leaves us way open for lawsuits. And to Rhea's point, that we do, if you want to do something, you've got to put it in writing what the numbers are, and to say that it's reasonable to put a solid fence. No, you've got to say solid fence if you think the solid fence is necessary. And then put it out there, and we talk about it. But to say, oh no, let's leave it up to the planning board, and we'll just leave it vague. That's not fair to the planning board, because that could lead into 10, 20 meetings and then lawsuits. It's up to us to vet this out, come up with something that's reasonable for what people want to do, for the look and the feel of the town, as well as the property owners, and make sure that we're not taking away so many of their rights that leaves us open to legal problems.
But through the chair, John, don't you agree that the reason we're talking about this is because of the outcry of the number of people in town over solar arrays? I mean, what I'm talking about is that the choice of screening becomes specific to the site. So for example, with this particular project on Alexander Road, where we've got a change in grade from going high to low and then back up high again, that might have been a recommendation for a solid screen instead of, just a setback. And that the town can make the recommendation for the specific kind of screen. I don't know. I feel like we're here talking about solar because people don't want these large solar farms anymore in the town.
Well, and if I may, to the chair, yeah, and I'm not disagreeing with anything anybody's saying. I just, it's really important that we talk about all this stuff, and one of the things that we could say is that an 8-foot fence or 30-foot arborvitaes, because we don't want somebody. I don't think anybody wants a 20-foot tall solid fence behind the houses, because then it looks like that it's a drive-in theater.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure there'd be objections to that aesthetically as well. Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I either have a 20-foot wall behind my house, or I have solar panels. So
yeah, that's kind of where a detailed site analysis would come into play, in that on Alexander Street, they might have benefited from an 8-foot fence at the property line.
right.
It would have blocked off the view behind that. Whereas just saying you have to have an 8-foot fence 100 feet in, as a blanket statement, is just not going to do quite as much as maybe putting in some of the verbiage of that model bylaw.
Right.
It requires a screening analysis to be looked at for each site.
Yeah, and that's why it's really important for us. Sorry, to the chair. Sorry, excuse me.
Go ahead.
That's why it's really important that we continue to vet this and figure out what some of these mitigation tactics that we could use could work. Because the planning board might not be able to think of some of these things that we're thinking of now, because we have time to do it. The planning board doesn't have that much time. 2 weeks between meetings, or sometimes 4 weeks between meetings when people are coming in and need an answer. So we talk about these things. 8-foot fence, if this under these conditions, 30-foot cypress or arborvitaes under these conditions, a 30-foot buffer under this condition, a 150-foot buffer under this condition, or 300-foot buffer under this condition. So this is what we should probably start trying to work out, is what can work, as opposed to just saying only these 3 properties can have solar in town, because that will never hold up, because it's just like, okay, so you just pick three people that might want it or something, that might not work. But so let's try and let's keep. I think we're working it out well, and we just have to keep going and come up with something that's like Ted was talking, that will pass 102 to 2.
Who are those two people who are going to vote against?
No,
Just kidding.
You guys that want to do a commercial development.
So this is my take thus far from the conversation, is that minimum lot size, there seems to be no reason to change that from 3 acres down lower, certainly, or possibly, doing it higher
Yeah.
wouldn't have a huge effect
right.
based on the maps that we saw last time. A maximum size we may consider, but nonetheless, a maximum, it may have an effect, but then again, it doesn't control where in town it shows up. So that this is a possibility that we can come back to. Anybody jump in who, feels strongly one or the other.
Yeah, Mary, I feel very strongly on the maximum size being smaller than 3 acres. I mean, if we don't want these large solar farms, it costs a lot of money to go through the process. And if it's not economically feasible today, it's not going to happen. It's just not, the developers are not going to show up. So
Okay.
I'm thinking we're looking at another town here. It said 1.5 acres. That's what makes sense, because that really literally reduces the ability to do a solar farm here again.
Mm-hmm.
Rhea, do you remember the first time we tried to pass any restrictions? You and I were both on the board, on the committee then, when people just said, wait, and we got nothing. If we try and say, when we try and do something that's contrarian to what people are thinking, like it just hit me what you were trying to do by saying the minimum, but then people might say that to them it seems like we're encouraging.
No, it's a maximum.
But this is what can happen. This is what happened to us 5 years ago when we first tried to.
But John, back then we didn't have all these projects. You see, people didn't understand what they were looking at back then. Now when they see a solar array, they say, well, that's a lot of land. If we limit the amount of land for these things, then we don't see the thing happening. It's just that's a fact. It's financially unfeasible. And I think that's an easier, faster way of reducing the number of solar farms coming here than trying to go through screening and coverage and all these other things that we were talking about. Because the average person going to town meeting, falls asleep. They don't get these things. It's not like this is their part of their everyday vernacular. So I'm just saying, like, if we were to pick something, that's probably the easiest thing to pick, and explaining it as why it's not economically feasible.
But the workaround for that is somebody takes the 99-acre plot, breaks it into 5 20-acre plots, and then comes in with 5.
No, actually, the language that I was looking at was a town in Western Massachusetts who said, if you combine lots, you still can't use more than 1.5 acres. So that's really the nut of the matter. I mean, I'm all for screening, and I'm all for coverage, and we're trying to figure out all these other details. That's not going to work at town meeting.
For the chair,
Yes, Ted?
I have a question and a comment regarding maximum lot size. What's the lot size of that little solar farm down on 85, close to the Milford border?
It's pretty darn small.
Exactly.
Right. So I don't know. I like what you're thinking, Rhea. And again, I think you and I are in the same place spiritually. I'm not sure that the minimum succeeds either, because somebody clearly found a way to make that profitable, and that's this little thing right next to the street. There's a house between the solar farm and the street. But my other question is, I continue to think, I think that the dirt sand pit at Fruit Street Fields is a fine place for a solar farm. I thought it was when it was first proposed in a planning meeting. To me, there's no reason to take that off of a place for a solar farm. It is not only disturbed, it's a mess. It's like a moonscape. And as far as I know, nobody's doing anything on it. And the town owns it. And if the town decides the best way to use this land that we're not using is a solar farm, I wouldn't want to eliminate that from a possibility.
I believe that's
That could be
already,
one of the exceptions. That's what I'm saying. What in the AFL language that you came up with, but to just let the rest of the town be a free for all, I'm not sure that it makes any sense. And I don't know the solar farm that's on the Milford line that you're talking about, but I'm sure that should have had some kind of screening regardless, right?
Probably. All I'm saying is they found a way to have a little bit of land and still, I assume it's a profitable little solar farm, or they wouldn't have built it. So yeah, and again, Rhea, I think we're in the same place, what you and I are hoping to achieve eventually. I'm just not sure that the minimum size is a panacea either.
Maximum size.
I'm sorry, maximum size. That's what I meant to say.
Yep.
Okay. And percentage of lot that can be developed, again, I don't think based on our the recent plans that have gone through, setting a percentage of a total lot to be covered really helps the situation beyond what the planning board can do with the current bylaw.
I agree.
Setbacks, we talked about. And again, to me, the setbacks are less important than what's between the setback and the abutting use. So it's more about screening. It's more about specific things about each individual lot and determining that. And I don't think, it is unreasonable, for instance, to say that that any abutting views should be blocked, that, year round, there should be sufficient screening so that the abutting use is not visible.
if I may, what we do is, as an engineer, we come up with a formula.
Mhm.
Formula for the slope of the land and the top and what would be the top of the project, at a 6 foot height, what is the height of the screening that's required? Just come up with a formula that picks the height of the screening that's required. And that could be something that's very easily determined.
Okay,
Through the
good.
chair,
Yes.
I just want to remind us all that I think we have two overarching goals. One is to protect neighborhoods, and John's formula might do that if we have it doesn't accomplish our second goal, which is to protect trees.
Yes.
We can screen like crazy. On the other side of that screen, whatever it is, all of the trees have been clear cut. If that happens, I would say we failed in half of our goal.
That's fair enough. But at the same time, if someone uses their property to build houses or other buildings, they would also
Right.
cut
Good.
trees. So we also, we cannot necessarily eliminate all development.
I don't think I'm proposing that. And I think, but I'm not either a neighborhood developer nor a solar developer. But I think what Curtis suggested, and he has more experience than I, is that if these lots of land that are being proposed for solar could be turned into neighborhoods, there's a lot more money to be made doing that. And that would be the proposal at the outset anyway. I think for the lots that we've seen, the idea that, well, if we don't put solar, we're going to put a neighborhood in here, I think it's an idle threat because they're not lots that are developable for neighborhoods. If they were, that's where the real money is for a developer.
Yep.
Actually, if you think about that Alexander Road one, that, you know, that overhead shot that you showed us,
Yep.
you know, there was as much left over. Actually, the amount of clear cut was seemed to be about as wide as the amount of trees that they left between the neighborhood and the site that they cleared out. So that's where that my formula, what we're saying, come up with the formula for the screening would have worked. You know, even now, go back and ask them, hey, could you mind putting up some taller trees? You know,
Mhm.
something like that.
No, it's absolutely true. There was, that's why the aerial view is so telling, is that you'd think that was going to be sufficient. You know, that was a huge, what seemed like a huge buffer of trees compared to the amount of panels, but nonetheless, it didn't screen. And that's because of, you know, the types of trees they were. They're all tall, the foliage is down, you know, for 8 months of the year or whatever. So yeah, that's very much true. And again, I'm not saying that, you know, that planning board hasn't learned from this issue, and I believe that although they aren't built, the other approvals that were done more recently have a lot better situations. It doesn't mean that they're, you know, they met with great popularity necessarily, and that's still, it's still a matter of you know, abutting neighborhoods being very concerned about them. But I do think they're going to be better. Go ahead, Sundar.
So many, if we consider anything beyond, let's say, a 5-acre limit, a large property, for instance, could we have a provision which says the solar panels and trees have to be in a checkerboard pattern, meaning you can't have just massive amounts of solar panels. Instead, could you in some way get creative, meaning the applicant could get creative, where they don't do a clear cut of trees throughout, they do it in such a pattern that it essentially they are able to put, let's say, 20 acres worth of panels, but you almost have to leave islands of trees in between. I'm not sure how to describe it, but almost like saying that solves for screening requirements, that it reduces the amount of trees that are cut. I'm just curious. I've never seen one like that, but I'm just curious if we could put a requirement almost like a checkerboard pattern.
I guess anything's possible, but
My guess is that would probably kill all the applicants. So I'm for that. Okay.
No, but Ria,
I don't think most solar people would say, yeah, trees right next to my solar.
Yeah, no.
No, but this is where I'm going with this. Just allow me to elaborate, right? So Ted spoke about that small solar farm off of 85. It was obviously viable enough. Now imagine me as an applicant. I've got a large property. Basically, all I'm doing is creating 5 of those small lots, but with the provision that I still have to leave a ton of trees in that lot. So I have a large property, but I can establish 5 of those. It won't be one contiguous solar farm. I'm just asking that, you know, we also open the door, but then also, you know, the applicant can say, yeah, I can possibly consider 5. Think of these as 5 different applicants vying for 5 different plots of land. That's all I'm trying to say here. So in essence, we meet in the middle. You get your solar farm. Not all the trees are cut. Your solar farms are interspersed with old growth trees and all that. I mean, the existing trees there. Just a thought.
Okay. I have written it down. It's official now. No, it's something, it's food for thought. And
Yeah, Mary,
I definitely think,
I'm sorry, could you send us your notes? Because I find them interesting as a place to start the next conversation.
Actually, yeah, but the starting place on these notes were sent to you by John along with the agenda.
Oh,
So-
they were, okay.
Yeah,
I'm
they were.
sorry, I didn't see
That's
that.
okay.
Through the chair, I did have one more question. Maybe this has already been considered. Is there a provision which says that if there is a pre-existing walking trail in that piece of land, that cannot be considered for a nature trail of some sort? It cannot be considered for a solar farm. It goes back to our goal of public welfare, right? I mean, there is one of those provisions. So
Mhm.
I'm just curious if that has already
Um,
been considered.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here and just say that wouldn't that make a property owner more likely to say, I'm not going to allow public access for trails on my property because that could limit whatever future development I want to do with the property. So I don't think that that would get us where we want to go. Just
Okay.
my thought on it.
What about town-owned land? I mean, could we put that provision for town-owned land? Or is town-owned land not even up for discussion here? I thought the Fruit Street property that Ted was talking about, which he suggested could be open for business for solar farms. Is that private owned or is that
It's town owned.
okay? So okay.
I don't know. Does town owned land have to follow all the zoning bylaws that everything else does, or do they just?
Yes, it does.
Oh,
Okay, it
yes.
So any of these zoning would apply to the town owned land as well.
Okay.
So we can talk, and we have in the past had trails preserved within developments. So existing
Yeah.
trails were able to be preserved.
Right. I recall that even in the Frankland application, yeah, that the trails were preserved. Yeah, you're right.
So
Yeah, not to be confused with previously disturbed sites like commercial sites, okay? We have to make this determination.
Right. And that's, but we have to consider all the options and that's, and we may, and like we talked about last time, we may consider each option one by one and see what makes sense within that option. But then also at the very end say, well, do we want to include all the options together and then present it that way? Or do we want to pare it down to, some very specific things in order to make it more amenable at town meeting and so on. So let's just keep trying to consider all the different options and discuss them one by one rather than throwing them out as possible, any possibility. So
to the chair, this is Rachel. Can I ask a question about any height regulations of the actual solar panels themselves? Like I know the sites that we've been looking at, the solar panels are very close to the ground. Is there any technical or bylaw requirements about their height? And I'm asking because if you do put trees interspersed with solar panels, that doesn't help if you can put the solar panel on a pole.
right.
If you know what I mean. But I don't know if that's technically possible or financially feasible.
The financial is probably the biggest thing because as you know, there's solar panels that can be placed over parking lots, but it is more expensive to do that. Probably because they have not just the height, but because of how solid they need to be because there's something underneath them and safety and all that. So that's just my guess in terms of that. It's more expensive. And John or anyone else, do you have any insight on that?
Yes, they're done at a certain height so that a growth can be cut from around it, but that it is the least expensive position on the ground facing the sun without a tree in small patches.
And I think there was a requirement in either our bylaw or the model bylaw that they had to be high enough off the ground that wildlife could pass under.
Mhm.
I can't remember which one that was in, but so you've got somewhere in between those two.
Right.
And I know in looking at the bylaws, the business districts are the only thing that have any height requirements, and that's, I think, 35 feet, but that it specifies, is it structures or buildings? So that's the only thing I remember seeing any height requirements on.
Yeah.
So to the chair, just an idea of putting a height requirement. You know, I don't know, does that mean that we're gonna have solar panels like up 20 feet tall? But
Right.
you know, if it's financially makes it more difficult to have a minimum height requirement, then that might be something we want to consider.
A minimum or a maximum, you're saying?
A minimum. So if you're requiring that the panels be up, I'm making up a number, 10 feet, maybe financially that makes it difficult to have a large scale solar farm. Of course, on the other hand, that could encourage people to put poles up with solar panels on top, you know, above a tree height. So
Yeah.
just an idea.
Okay. Okay, got it. And I just added also wildlife passages, you know, that again is done now, but I just wanted to make sure it's in here. Okay. So when we're talking about grade and hilltops and so on, from the maps that we looked at last week, there was not a significant amount of steep slopes in town. And then we also learned today that, you know, the Lumber Street Alexander Road example wouldn't have even shown up on that grading map because it's less than 10% grade. Yet the slope did influence the way that site was screened or the lack thereof, more to the point. So I find, you know, this is my take on it again, and please feel free to voice your thoughts. Is that putting anything around the grade into bylaw does not make sense, other than to say this will be taken into account, but not to say it's prohibited for slopes over 10% or something like that. That it's just too site specific to be that specific in the wording. That's
I agree. Okay. I agree, Mary. I don't think you can do specific percentages of grade because of sight lines, and sight lines are specific to a site.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way I could share my screen if I'm talented enough to actually do that? I found one of the cross sections I did back in.
Great. So you have to pick the one that it is, and then hit share in the bottom right corner.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, this was a project I did. We were consulting for a town in Cary, Illinois, and they were a sand and gravel company was wanting to come in here and mine out a tremendous amount of material. I don't know if you can see the little purple line.
Mm-hmm.
They were mining out each one of these lines is like 5 feet. So they were going to dig this huge crater, and we wanted to look at how that was going to affect. They were looking for a special permit to permit this since it wasn't otherwise. We did cross sections in different areas. This was a neighborhood. Can you see my?
Yep.
Okay. I was hoping I could point. This was a typical house along where this cross section was taken. they had this little berm proposed at the top of their cut slope.
Mhm.
If you were running a portable rock crusher or a bunch of loading equipment down here in this corner, you had a line that sight and sound and everything could come in. If we required something similar to this for the sites, you know, the way houses are spread mostly at Hopkinton, you could do several sections around to show a typically how this could be screened. We propose putting a much taller berm in to screen out the sound and I mean, this is something that can be pulled off of as long as they've got a topo map from USGS or something.
Mhm.
This kind of section can be cut fairly easily by an engineer or landscape architect. If we had something along these lines to look at, in some cases, like I said, like the Alexander Road site, it might have been better to have a fence or a berm right at the property line,
Mhm.
screen the view. Even just a schematic cross section like this will give you a pretty good idea of what you would see from a particular point.
Right.
So it sounds to me like we don't want to cut trees. We don't want these giant developments, and we don't want to look at a bunch of solar panels. If we could come up with our size and setback requirements and then had a pretty robust, I don't know if we want to say only on cleared sites, but maybe cut the coverage down and then have a pretty robust, prove that we're not going to be looking at a big ugly thing forever and ever. That might be the three things we ought to kind of shoot for.
Okay, so what would this be called?
This is just a cross section through. Let's see if I can.
Elevation cross section, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So see if I can. Yeah, so this was the site. Highway was over here. They were trying to, not make it look so bad from the highway. And then we had this neighborhood. We cut cross sections and all these blue lines to see what it looked like from those different areas.
Okay.
Part of it was for a sound study, and part of it was just for the visual for these houses along the back. So we typically took the highest house in the area and looked at what that was. And then we wound up proposing a much larger berm. And then we left a bunch of material here to cut the sound and sight while it was going. This was a 10-year phased process, but it's not that difficult to cut these kind of cross sections to look at the effect. And that would show you where a fence or a wall or a berm or whatever would be most effective, or, an evergreen landscape line.
Right.
This is not rocket science really, so it's not like it would be a big burden on the developer to prepare something like this.
Right. I think this is something that we can put in there, definitely. Just
yeah, and
it
looked kind of like some of the verbiage in that model bylaw would kind of lean toward that.
Yes, absolutely. Good.
So I think if you had your definite size and setback requirements and then some performance requirements to make sure we don't cut down too many trees and we're not looking, everybody's not staring at these panels.
Yes.
That's our three principal things to try to hit.
I agree. Okay. So I would, I think for next time, I'm going to be working on like a list of the screening possibilities based on our current bylaws, the model bylaw, other bylaws that we've gotten examples of, and so on, to show that these are the types of screening requirements we can pull from for these types of developments. But then requiring an elevation cross section, I should say, several elevation cross sections of a sight lines and noise lines or whatever for abutters. And that would be, I think that would be extremely helpful. Because I don't, John Gelsich, you just can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that's in the requirements for a special permit or for site review right now. So,
No, it's not.
okay, that would be good. And so, okay. So we're pretty much saying, yeah, we can mention grade and so on, but again, it is specific to a situation, so it's not going. We're not going to put specifics, percentages in here. The density of solar panels and particularly the interspersion with trees, I think that's something that we can, investigate a little bit more and see whether or not there's any possibilities for that. Setbacks, I think we've pretty much decided to scrap in terms of changes in the solar bylaw and percentage of lot that can be developed. But we can come back to the minimum, maximum lot sizes.
Through the chair,
Yes.
just an extension of my, checkerboard pattern. I just want to propose one more thing. Would it be possible at all for us to put a restriction on the ability of the applicant to cut trees with beyond a particular diameter? So small trees can be cut, but beyond a certain girth, those would need to be left alone. Is that so? Instead of a complete clear cut, would it be possible for us to restrict the cutting down of certain large trees?
John?
So my concern with the checkerboard idea and keeping these larger trees is that it may work for the town to get to their goals because the developers aren't going to be able to put solar panels in an area that's going to be shaded by these trees. So even if it's a checkerboard, it's going to affect where the solar panels can be. So if that is done, is that going to stand up to the test of not being overly restrictive of solar? And I don't know if that's going to be true.
I mean, I think, John, through the chair, I mean, certain restrictions may still be permitted, but overly I don't know if this passes the filter of, is this overly restrictive or is it reasonably restrictive? I don't know. Maybe that is a thin line. I don't know that.
Yeah, through the chair, my concern is just it would depend on the site, but I'm just thinking if you have a very wooded area that is proposed for solar, and you prohibit cutting down trees that are 6 inches or greater, there may be a significant amount of trees in that wooded area, which would really prohibit solar effectively because you're going to have, depending on where the trees are located, you're going to have limited open areas to actually locate the panels. And then where you can even locate the panels, will those then be shaded by the trees that still exist?
And I
Right.
just thought of a safety concern too. I mean, we all know that our trees are constantly falling on the trails and so on after storms. And in the situation where that happens on a solar farm and there's breakage of a solar panel, that can cause leaking of chemicals, I believe. So I'm not positive of that, but that's a possibility.
Through the chair, one last comment maybe. I guess my motivation of saying all these things was, the data that you have previously, where you've shown that even in a large lot, I think the coverage of the term that you used was coverage was 21% or 14%. I mean, does that imply that the rest of the land in that parcel of land is still wooded, or does it mean that it was clear cut completely, but solar panels only exist in 14% or 20% of that property? So as a result, what I'm proposing is, if applicants are able to survive with only that much land being available to set up a solar farm, does that imply that they could just as well leave the trees alone as long as 20% of that land or 15% of that land was available to them to install solar panels? So as a result, that's the whole point. I'm trying to understand whether that coexistence of trees and solar farms is possible. I'm just trying to counter the argument that there won't be enough land to install solar panels when we've clearly shown that it's only 14% of the land or 20% of the land where solar panels have been installed in a particular lot, right? I mean, the three examples that you have at the start of this document. Am I making sense? Even in a large lot, only a small percentage of that lot seems to be required for making this a viable solar farm.
Yeah, so maybe instead of a minimum or maximum coverage requirement, that we have a minimum and maximum clearing requirement. And within that cleared area, if you can get a solar farm in, if you had a minimum 5 acre and you could only save 40% of it could be cleared, then that might help drive what could go in as far as a solar farm. And when you maintain some of your coverage, but you could still allow someone to move ahead with that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to strike a balance here between, cutting a lot of trees and not allowing the solar farm to exist at all. So that's my point.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking through. That's what my silence means.
Yeah, I'd really considered it on a clearance basis, how much can be cleared rather than how much you can build.
Right.
That would, saying you can only clear a certain amount. If the site is 100% clear to start with, then they're not going to clear anything.
Right.
But they're still restricted on how much they can actually construct.
So through the chair, we've had this discussion before in terms of clearing, prohibiting clearing or restricting it based on clearing. And the situation that I've always brought up is that what happens when somebody foresees that they're going to do a solar use on their property, clears the land, and then 2 years later goes for the special permit. They've kind of already done the dirty work, so to speak, and now it doesn't really factor into the special permit anymore.
It becomes previously
there's nothing we can do about that.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is I don't know if this limiting clearing really is going to affect as much as some people might want it to.
Can you put some kind of duration requirement on from clear cut to solar panel?
Could.
So that would keep somebody from saying, well, 24 months, I want to put in a solar farm, so I'm going to clear cut this now. If you said, 5 years between any kind of clearing, and I mean, you shouldn't restrict anybody's right to, harvest the forestry products off of their property, but to do it just to put in the development would be kind of restricted by that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably the best possibility. So more recent developments, it seems to me that, the percentage that is solar, I think, is just talking about the solar panels and perhaps the, any associated buildings or structures. And there's always, the fencing around that. There's an access road. All of those slightly increase the size. It's not a huge amount beyond what the solar panels themselves are. But that slight increase, including the access road and fencing and so on, is where the tree clearing generally takes place. And generally, at least in recent developments that were on wooded sites or partially wooded sites, then beyond that minimum needed for the construction and where the solar panels would exist, the developers have been leaving the trees, have been leaving the natural vegetation as much as they possibly could around those developments. So that's what I'm recalling from most recent developments, and based on the discussions that were had in planning board and so on, is that they were leaving the natural landscape. I think there's a certain distance outside of the solar panels that they like to cut just for, to keep the shade off of the panels, obviously. But I don't know what that minimum distance is. And it's usually where the access road is anyhow. So they need to cut it either way. But generally speaking, there's always a buffer of the natural vegetation left around the site. Just as a starting point of the screening. And then additional trees are added. So, okay. So I would like to conclude by about 8:30 tonight, and I would like to ask all of you to look into the types of things that you think should be mentioned specifically in a bylaw around the screening, the sight lines, the types of things that you would want specified. It doesn't have to, you don't have to go into, the species of trees or anything like that unless you think that's important. But just say, write down what you think is important that the planning board would have in front of them as the bylaw to hold developers to. So think about that. Stormwater regulations, I would like, John, if you can, prepare just whatever overview for us of what is already covered in other rules and regs regarding stormwater, regarding erosion and protection of private wells and water table and so on, because I don't know that it's necessary to add things to the solar bylaw that are specific to those things if they're covered elsewhere adequately. But we need to know what's covered in various other locations in our bylaws. Okay.
I can look into this, but I would guess that the stormwater regulations are going to be pretty comprehensive, but I'll still take a look.
Okay, thanks. Okay, and I'll also review again the model bylaw in terms of the maintenance and abandonment bond, payment in lieu of taxes, all of those things I know exist in our current bylaw, and I'm going to compare them to this model bylaw, see if there's anything that's, that comes up that's that looks different enough that we should take a look at it.
Mary, there's one other item that I found when I was researching today, and that is most of the towns that have solar farms, they require the developer to remove the solar farms after their life has ended.
Yeah, we have that too.
Okay, so I just want to be sure because I wasn't clear that we had that.
Yeah, we do. It's in the conditions of every development that I've been on the board for, and I believe it's also listed in the bylaws. So, but we can go through it just to make sure that everybody's comfortable with it.
And then if you could just send what you've written down tonight to us,
sure.
Like before, like tomorrow, before we get to our next meeting, just so we have something to think about before the day of.
Sure. I know. I always make big goals for myself, and then time passes, and all of a sudden the other meeting is coming up. So, yes, I will do so. I promise. I believe, let's see, when is our next meeting? I know the planning board has one on the next week and the following week. So we are the week after that, December 14th at 7. Okay, great. I have a few clarification suggestions for the minutes. And everybody can pull up the minutes if they'd like to, and sharing is paused, sharing. Oops, stop
I
sharing.
have one
There we
too.
go. Okay. Okay, so. Okay, can you see the highlighting, John? Okay, good. So this is an overview. Town council advises the test is the first, and I would just put in the words of the test, the wording about the public safety, health, safety, and welfare. I would just put that in there for clarity. And then on the page 2, yeah, I was just highlighting that public health, safety, and welfare because it's mentioned there again, the test. So that's good. I'm sorry, that highlight has nothing to do with changes to the minutes. That just is a highlight for me to remember that point. I believe this one here. Ask Mr. Galsich what would be covered by stormwater regulations related to solar. I don't think it's related to solar. I think it was already in place in relation to any development. So I don't know. Maybe that doesn't need clarification, but I thought the first time I read that, I was like, what do you mean stormwater regulations related to solar? But maybe it's just to make sure that the stormwater regulations do apply to solar developments and there's not
Madam-
anything special that we need to
Madam Chair, why don't I say Ms. Larson Marlowe asked Mr. Gelsich what would be covered by stormwater regulations that would apply to solar.
Okay, sounds good. And then there was a map suggested by John. And I don't think we followed up on that, but if that's something that you can get together for next time.
So I cannot find the zoning shapefile, and I've asked IT for it.
Oh,
So
no.
I can't make this map at the moment.
Okay. Okay, got it. So the zoning file might need to be recreated, is what you're saying.
The zoning map, if it ever needs to be updated in terms of districts, needs to be figured out where the shapefiles are. Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. We won't mention that. And okay. And this is on the, I think the last page, or page 4, sorry, page 4 out of 5. Solar is only for commercial solar. Oh, the bylaw is only for commercial solar and not for accessory solar. Yeah, I think that's what you meant to say is the bylaw, the solar bylaw. Okay,
Yep.
That's it.
And I'm sorry, in the same page, if you don't, Mary, just, sorry,
Yes.
just you passed the paragraph. The paragraph about the one that you've highlighted, it says that if a better area cannot be found, then this one says if a better area can be found, the industrial districts would fill the void. So I think it was
Cannot.
something cannot be found. That's it.
Okay. It's right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Any other updates to the minutes? Hearing none. Move.
Motion to approve. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Second.
Seconded.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, motion to approve as amended.
Okay, as amended. Okay. And Sundar seconded. John,
Yes.
I'll start with you for a vote. Okay. Ria,
Yes.
Sundar,
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Madhu,
Yes.
Ron,
Yes.
Ted,
Ted, yes.
Curtis.
Curtis, yes.
I'm sorry, Rachel, you can't vote on the minutes. It's very exciting, but, and Mary, yes. Minutes are approved. Okay, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
moved.
Raman, so moved.
Don't rush over yourselves too much. Okay. Ria,
Yes.
Sundar,
Yes.
Curtis,
Yes.
Ted,
Ted, yes.
Ron,
Yes.
John,
And John, yes.
Madhu,
Yes.
Rachel, and Mary says yes. Okay. We
Great
are
seeing you.
adjourned for this evening. I really
Happy
appreciate
Thanksgiving.
everybody
Be
doing
safe.
research on this and thinking hard about it while we're away, sleeping on it. Okay.
Great meeting.
Happy
Great, thank-
Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Happy
Thank you.
Thanksgiving, Mary.
Stay safe.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Your
Bye.
hard work, Mary.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Hey, Mary,
Yeah?
are you the host?
Nope.
I
Oh.
am.
John
Can you
Gelsich.
just linger for just a heartbeat after the camera shut off?
Sure.
One of the chats super quick.
I don't know if HCAM turns their cameras off or if they wait until I cancel the meeting.
Okay. All right, then don't worry about it. Mary, I'll shoot you an email. I thought it'd be easier if we could just chat real quick.
Okay.
I can set up a Google Meet really quick if you'd like.
Sure, that would make it easier for me if that's no trouble for you.
Yeah.
Does
So
that
you-
have an email from you in a moment?
Yes, I will send an invite in a minute. Just the two of you.
Yeah, I just, and it's super.
Hi, guys. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. You did a great job tonight.
Thank you.
All right, John, I'm going to hang up on this one then.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
John. Bye.